I was standing face to face with CCU Doctor2 outside Mama's room. I asked CCU Doctor2 again to tell me Mama's correct systolic blood pressure after he measured it from Mama's femoral artery. His response was the same as when I first asked, well above 200. I dropped it. I felt Emerson Hospital had already started changing Mama's medical records and covering their tracks. CCU Doctor2 was smirking. Why was he smirking? I didn't know it then, but that would not be the last time I saw CCU Doctor2's evil smirk. I walked away, entered Mama's room, and closed the sliding door, leaving CCU Doctor2 in the hallway. Mama had settled down. I could feel it in my soul. Now I knew what Mama wanted me to know, and Mama knew I would take it from here. I told Mama that I knew. That's all I said. That's all I needed to say. Mama was seriously injured, but Mama understood. We always had a way of communicating without words. CCU Doctor2's response reverberated in my head. Well above 200. Well above 200. Well above 200. Well above 200. What did that mean? I feared Mama had a massive stroke. I had to stay positive. I pushed all those thoughts away and sat quietly with Mama, holding her hand. Before I left, I told Mama that I loved her and I would return in a few hours. My car was still parked at the emergency department entrance. The drive home was depressing. I continued hearing CCU Doctor2's voice the entire drive home. Well above 200. Well, I didn't know what well above 200 meant. Everyone at Emerson Hospital knew precisely what it meant. Everyone knew the evil secret except me. The house felt different as I pulled into the driveway. Mama was a light sleeper, but there was silence as I approached Mama's room. I slowly peeked into Mama's room as if that would make a difference. Mama wasn't there. This wasn't a dream. This was a nightmare. Mama was in trouble. The doctors were lying. I crawled into Mama's bed and cried. Mama needed me, so I got up, sat at my desk, and started sketching the timeline on paper to put the puzzle pieces together. I had to rewind, go back 20 hours, and sketch the timeline step by step. It was only then that Emerson Hospital's pure evilness became apparent. For those highly trained doctors, the cover-up was more important than Mama's life. That's not my opinion. This is confirmed by juxtaposing Mama's medical records against the timeline. This is Emerson Hospital's evil timeline. Mama arrived at Emerson Hospital via ambulance on August 6, 2021, a little after 8 o'clock a.m. Mama's medical records say the time of greet was 8:09 a.m. I raced to the hospital and arrived about 30 minutes later at approximately 8:39 a.m. While I was in the emergency department, I observed 3 instances where Mama's systolic blood pressure was uncontrolled. In the first 2 instances, Mama's systolic blood pressure went from the low 130s to 83 back to the low 130s. Afterward, there was a second occurrence from the low 130s to 60 and back to the low 130s without any intermediate readings. I told the emergency department nurse who was in the room on both occasions. Why did I have to tell the emergency department nurse that Mama's systolic blood pressure precipitously dropped? The nurse would not have known if I wasn't in the emergency department watching everything. There was no audible alarm. When Mama's systolic blood pressure suddenly dropped to 60, the nurse barely glanced at the monitor, but acknowledged that the systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong. Nobody cared that Mama's systolic blood pressure reading dropped to 60 in the emergency department and that the cuff reading was wrong. Something was wrong with Mama's systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff. The arrogant admitting CCU doctor visited Mama, and there was a third episode of Mama's systolic blood pressure being uncontrolled. Mama's systolic blood pressure fell again from the low 130s to 83 and then back to the low 130s. The arrogant admitting CCU doctor ignored it. I told the admitting CCU doctor about the first two episodes of Mama's systolic blood pressure being uncontrolled, and the admitting CCU doctor still ignored it. An argument ensued. I knew Mama's life was at risk when I was in the emergency department, and I have no medical training whatsoever. That's why I argued with the CCU doctor. I wasn't going to let Mama's uncontrolled systolic blood pressure go untreated. Why did I have to argue with the arrogant admitting CCU doctor over Mama's uncontrolled systolic blood pressure? Emerson Hospital acted with reckless disregard and depraved indifference to Mama's life. Remember the 3 incorrect systolic blood pressure readings. It is a core part of the cover-up. There's something wrong with the leadership of CEO Christine Schuster and the senior leadership team, including Dr. Barrett Kitch, board certified in critical care medicine, Dr. Craig L. Best, and Christy Barney, Vice President of Quality and Patient Safety, when a CCU doctor feels emboldened to waltz into the emergency department and ignore 3 medical errors that I assert killed Mom. I continued sketching out the timeline. Mama's endoscopy was completed without incident. Mama's medical records indicate scope out 353-16. 2 interventional radiologists approached me in the waiting area outside the operating room. They told me that the gastroenterologist viewed Mama's stomach, esophagus, and the first part of Mama's small intestine, but could not locate the bleed source. The interventional radiologist asked permission to do an IR procedure to look further into Mama's intestines to find and stop the bleeding. I consented. Here is where things go drastically wrong. CCU Doctor2 unwittingly told me that Mama's systolic blood pressure precipitously dropped to 60. A code was called before, during, or after the interventional radiologist procedure. Emerson Hospital panics and starts pumping Mama with pressors, 4 pressors in total, one after the other, to raise Mama's systolic blood pressure. I assert that Mama's systolic blood pressure was in the low 130s, and the systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong, just as it had been on at least 3 occasions in the emergency department. The gastroenterologist exited the operating room and approached me, panicked. He asked me what I wanted him to do, which seemed absurd. I sternly told him to help Mama. It never crossed my mind to ask if there was a problem with Mama's systolic blood pressure, because I handled it in the emergency department, or so I thought. In hindsight, there are troubling questions. Why was the gastroenterologist panicked? Doesn't make sense. There should have been no need to panic. A 50 or 70-point drop in systolic pressure from the cuff should have been anticipated, given the 3 prior instances of 50-plus point drops in the emergency department. I'm an electrical engineer, and I predicted that Mama's systolic blood pressure could precipitously drop again. That is why I started the argument with the CCU doctor in the emergency department. Mama should not have been cleared to have the procedure until her systolic blood pressure was stabilized and controlled. Emerson Hospital acted with reckless disregard and depraved indifference to Mama's life. I can't bring Mama back, but I may be able to save someone else's Mama. At least then, Mama's death won't be in vain. So many questions persist. The CCU nurse and the arrogant admitting CCU doctor knew Mama's systolic blood pressure was uncontrolled. What was the chain of communication for Mama's uncontrolled systolic blood pressure? What safeguards were put in place to protect Mama's life? So many thoughts raced through my mind. I sat at my desk and stared at a blank piece of paper. How did the puzzle pieces fit? How was the cover-up planned and executed? I organized my thoughts into who, what, when, where, why, and how. I started with when. When did the cover-up start? Unbeknownst to me, the transport team brought Mama to the CCU on August 6, 2021 at 6:50 p.m. on life support. I don't know that Mama was finally transferred to the CCU. I'm still waiting at the hospital for an update. I was at the hospital the entire time, but there were no updates on Mama's condition. Something wasn't right. The transport team told CCU Doctor2 that Mama's systolic blood pressure was 60. CCU Doctor2 took one look at Mama, and he immediately knew the systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong. How do I know this? Because CCU Doctor2 unwittingly told me those exact words early the next morning when I outsmarted him. So at 6:50 p.m., if not before, Emerson Hospital unequivocally knew Mama's systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong. It is indisputable. The cover-up started straight away. Mama's arrival at the CCU on August 6, 2021 at 6:50 p.m. is critical in the timeline. Why? I believe Mama was still alive at 6:50 p.m. Mama had serious and permanent injuries, but I believe Mama was still alive. If Emerson Hospital had told the truth on August 6, 2021 at 6:50 p.m., there would not have been a 27days.com website, a 27 Days YouTube channel, a Change.org petition, or protests at Emerson Hospital. Emerson Hospital should have done 4 things. 1. Provide complete transparency on what happened in the operating room and the circumstances of Mama's serious injury to me and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. 2. Conducted root cause analysis. 3. Developed a plan for putting processes, measurement techniques, and reviews in place to ensure that this would never happen to another family. And 4. After the plan was verified over time, Emerson Hospital should have apologized for killing Mama. That would have been the end for me. I could have started the grieving process. All Emerson Hospital had to do was tell the truth. Instead, at this pivotal moment, Emerson Hospital smirked, lied, and engaged in extraordinary acts to cover up Mama's serious injury and subsequent death. Just culture at Emerson Hospital means just cover it up. CCU Doctor2 could have been the hero and told the truth. I don't believe CCU Doctor2 was in the operating room, but he is not innocent. He knowingly and willingly participated in the cover-up of Mama's death, along with the other Emerson Hospital thug doctors. There was a time gap of 7 hours and 31 minutes before Emerson Hospital allowed me to see Mama. There was no reason to keep me from seeing Mama. Mama wasn't undergoing a procedure or extensive medical tests. Mama was lying in room 404, alone, and deprived of medical care she desperately needed. I believe the cover-up was planned during those 7 hours and 31 minutes, and that's why Emerson Hospital wouldn't let me see Mama. For 7 hours and 31 minutes, the cover-up raged on. The highly trained doctors plotted on how to cover up Mama's death. For 7 hours and 31 minutes, the doctors conspired on how to keep the truth from me. They were determined to bury their secret forever. I was at the hospital the entire time, waiting and waiting and waiting for an update on Mama. The update never came because the doctors were too busy with the cover-up. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't realize the pure evil happening on the 4th floor while waiting for an update on Mama. Why cover up Mama's death? Emerson Hospital had 2 choices: tell the truth or lie. Emerson Hospital chose to lie and cover up Mama's death. Why? I believe the answer is simple. Emerson Hospital felt they could kill Mama and get away with it. I think the doctors, perhaps with help from CEO Christine Schuster and the senior leadership team, conducted a risk-benefit analysis. They concluded that they could kill Mama and that I would not discover their crime. I think the doctors and their co-conspirators felt a sense of entitlement, superiority, and arrogance that their privilege would allow them to kill Mama and get away with it. The implication, equally important, is that Emerson Hospital didn't think I was intelligent enough and determined enough to put the puzzle pieces together and figure out that something sinister had happened to Mama. Who was involved in the cover-up? Law enforcement has a blue wall of silence, and medicine has a white coat or a white wall of silence. The white wall of silence went up immediately. This is Emerson Hospital's white wall of silence. It would not surprise me if CEO Christine Schuster and the entire senior leadership team, including the 2 doctors on the senior leadership team, Dr. Barrett Kitch, board certified in critical care medicine, and Dr. Craig L. Best, and Christy Barney, Vice President of Quality and Patient Safety, are involved in the cover-up. By supporting the white wall of silence, this team is complicit in the cover-up of Mama's death. I can name some doctors who participated in the cover-up, but I don't know everyone involved, and I still haven't figured out some parts of the cover-up. This is why Mama's death needs to be investigated. Dr. Robbie Goldstein, Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and Kate Walsh, Secretary of Health and Human Services, need to do their jobs and investigate Mama's death. Dr. Goldstein, it's your job to tell me the circumstances of Mama's death and the scope of the cover-up, not vice versa. Where did the cover-up happen? The cover-up was planned on the 4th floor as soon as Mama arrived at the CCU. It's possible the cover-up started before Mama arrived at the CCU. There are still significant pieces of the puzzle that I don't know. Mama was under the care of the arrogant admitting CCU doctor. I assume he was advised that Mama, his patient, coded in the operating room and the reason for the code. The arrogant admitting CCU doctor knew that this was now the 4th time Mama's systolic blood pressure from the cuff had dropped by 50 points or more, and the 2nd time it had fallen to 60. I don't believe the arrogant admitting CCU doctor woke up that morning and while he was brushing his teeth, looked in the mirror and said, "I'd like to kill Mrs. Sprinkle today." But what did the arrogant admitting CCU doctor do when the code was called, since he knew the systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff in the operating room was almost guaranteed to be wrong, just as it was 3 times in the emergency department, and he knew that pumping Mama with 4 pressors when her systolic blood pressure was normal would almost certainly kill Mama? Did the arrogant admitting CCU doctor idly stand by and watch Emerson Hospital kill Mama? Did the cover-up start in the operating room before Mama was transferred to the CCU? If so, are the two IR doctors, the anesthesiologists, and the nurses who were present in the operating room also involved in the cover-up of Mama's death? Dr. Robbie Goldstein, I want answers. Does the corruption at Emerson Hospital extend to the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and Governor Maura Healey? What was the evil plan the doctors devised during the 7 hours and 31 minutes that the cover-up raged on? I wasn't there, but I can piece parts of the puzzle together based on the doctor's interactions with me. There were two parts to the evil plan. During the 7 hours and 31 minutes that the cover-up was planned, there must have been a conversation between the arrogant admitting CCU doctor and CCU Doctor2. Why? There were only 3 people who had first-hand knowledge of Mama's uncontrolled systolic blood pressure in the emergency department: the emergency department nurse, the arrogant admitting CCU doctor, and me. The arrogant admitting CCU doctor knew Mama's systolic blood pressure was uncontrolled in the emergency department, and more importantly, the arrogant admitting CCU doctor knew that I knew Mama's systolic blood pressure was uncontrolled in the emergency department. That's the basis for the argument I started in the emergency department. So all the doctors, and perhaps CEO Christine Schuster and the senior leadership team strategizing on the cover-up, knew that if they mentioned anything about Mama's systolic blood pressure suddenly dropping to 60, I would know the cuff reading in the operating room was wrong, and that was factored in when they devised their evil plan. So the first part of the evil plan was to keep what happened in the operating room secret and maintain the secret by any means necessary. The plan was not to disclose that Mama's systolic blood pressure dropped to 60 in the operating room. The plan was to lie and intentionally evade any questions regarding the circumstances that caused Mama to be placed on life support. The second part of the plan was sickeningly depraved. The second part of the plan was to withhold medical care to Mama if it would incriminate the doctors in Emerson Hospital in Mama's death. These highly trained specialty doctors refused to provide medical care to Mama if it would expose their evil secret. How was the evil plan executed? On August 6, 2021, at 6:50 p.m., the transport team brought Mama to the CCU and told CCU Doctor2 that Mama's systolic blood pressure was 60. It is indisputable that CCU Doctor2 and his co-conspirator doctors knew Mama's systolic blood pressure wasn't 60 when Mama arrived at the CCU, and that the systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong. While I was waiting for an update on Mama's condition, Emerson Hospital was executing the second part of the evil plan. The second part of the evil plan was to withhold medical care to Mama to protect the secret. The plan was not to render medical care to Mama if it would incriminate the doctors in Emerson Hospital in Mama's death. On August 6, 2021, at 6:50 p.m., CCU Doctor2 intentionally, with forethought, failed to do anything to discover Mama's correct systolic blood pressure. Mama needed help. CCU Doctor2 did this so we wouldn't have to record Mama's correct systolic blood pressure in Mama's medical records. There's an adage in medicine that says, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. CCU Doctor2 intentionally withheld medical care so there wouldn't be anything incriminating in Mama's medical records. He didn't want to record Mama's correct systolic blood pressure in the medical records. I believe Mama's systolic blood pressure was astronomically high at this point. I also believe that Mama had some permanent injuries, but Mama was still alive. No one helped Mama, and that was the evil plan. This is my Mama. I will fight for Mama forever. Emerson Hospital acted with reckless disregard and depraved indifference to Mama's life. It's now past midnight, and we're still at the hospital waiting and waiting and waiting for an update. More importantly, Mom is on the fourth floor in the CCU, alone, still waiting and waiting and waiting for a doctor to provide medical assistance. After 7 hours and 31 minutes of scheming, at approximately 2:21 the next morning, we were finally allowed in the CCU. I knew something wasn't right. The execution of the evil plan to cover up Mama's death is well underway by the corrupt, thug doctors. We were led down the long hallway to the CCU conference room for a family meeting. There were patient rooms on the right and left side of the CCU wing. The CCU floor was eerily quiet, except for the footprints leading us to the CCU conference room and the occasional beeps for medical equipment. I casually looked into each room as I walked down the hallway when I happened to look to my right into room 404 and saw Mama on life support. I was shocked and devastated. The doctors leading us to the conference room were steps ahead of us, and they casually walked past Mama's room, heads facing forward, like they were on a Sunday stroll in the park. The only thing they didn't do was whistle and snap their fingers. How sick and depraved are these doctors? Everyone knew Mama was on life support, except us. No one had the decency or the compassion to tell me that Mama was on life support before I saw her, and none of the doctors gave a damn. Why? The answer is stunningly evil. Mama arrived at Emerson Hospital on August 6, 2021 at 8:09 a.m. as a patient. When Emerson Hospital unequivocally knew they killed Mama, Mama was no longer a patient in their eyes. Mama was a problem Emerson Hospital had to eliminate. The cover-up became all-consuming. The cover-up was more important than telling me that Mama was on life support before I saw her. The cover-up was more important than updating me on Mama's status. The cover-up was more important than those highly skilled doctors providing medical care to Mama. The cover-up was more important than Mama's life. It was all about Emerson Hospital hiding their evil secret forever by any means necessary. Emerson Hospital acted with reckless disregard and depraved indifference to Mama's life. After we visited with Mama, we walked down the CCU hallway for the family meeting. Emerson Hospital now proudly executed the first part of the evil plan. Don't disclose what happened in the operating room. After 7 hours and 31 minutes of scheming and colluding, all the doctors, including the gastroenterologist, developed amnesia and couldn't remember what happened in the operating room hours before. Mysteriously, none of the doctors could recall the precipitating event that caused Mama to be placed on life support. The gastroenterologist was in the CCU family meeting, and he also developed amnesia about what happened in the operating room, along with his corrupt colleagues. This is the same gastroenterologist who ran out of the operating room panicked hours before. Mama's gastroenterologist at Middlesex Digestive Health was on vacation. The gastroenterologist in the operating room was also from Middlesex Digestive Health. Mama's gastroenterologist knew Mama was the boss, but I had 3 rules that Mama had to follow. 1, I would never put Mama in a nursing home. 2, we never allowed Mama to go to a doctor's appointment without one of us. One of us was there even if Mama went to get her toenail clipped. We were helicopter children. We didn't hover over Mama. We were all up in Mama's medical business. In hindsight, we were downright, straight up, annoying. I don't know how Mama put up with us. Mama's gastroenterologist knew this. If Mama's gastroenterologist had been there during the 7 hours and 31 minutes of scheming, things might have been different. I'm sure she would have had the common sense to tell the other doctors, if you mess with Mrs. Pringle, Pam is coming for you. The cover-up was full on. The family meeting ended quickly with no answers. The doctors executed the first part of the evil plan. They refused to tell us what happened in the operating room. They assured us that Mama being on life support was routine, that Mama would just wake up and that we should reconvene later that morning. That was a blatant lie. The doctors left the family meeting and we stayed behind for a few minutes. I'm sure the corrupt doctors high-fived and fist-bumped each other and congratulated themselves on successfully executing Part 1 and Part 2 of their evil plan. Emerson Hospital's privilege convinced them that they had gotten away with killing Mama and covering it up. The doctors took one look at us and assumed we were unintelligent. Electrical engineers are just as brilliant as doctors, and there were 3 double E's in the CCU family meeting. I knew Emerson Hospital was lying. Something wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. Emerson Hospital had a secret, and everyone was in on it. What was Emerson Hospital hiding from me? We left the conference room and visited with Mama. It was a sad visit. Mama and I always had a way of communicating non-verbally. Mama wouldn't settle down. There was something Mama wanted me to know. I could feel it in my soul. After visiting with Mama, we announced to the nurses and doctors station in the middle of the CCU floor that we were leaving. I walked with my family to exit the CCU. At the CCU door, I told everyone to leave and that I wanted to return to the CCU to visit with Mama for a bit longer. I returned and stood outside Mama's room in the CCU hallway so I wouldn't become emotional. Mama wouldn't settle down. I felt it again in my soul. There's something Mama wanted me to know. What was it? I knew Emerson Hospital had a secret, and I wasn't leaving until I uncovered the secret. I had no idea how evil the secret was. I was ready for a showdown with Mama's CCU doctor. I told the nurse that I wanted to see Mama's doctor. Mama's CCU doctor arrived, and it quickly became apparent that he was in on the cover-up. By now, about 8 hours and 30 minutes had elapsed since Mama arrived at the CCU. I still can't figure out why Mom was on life support. I won't repeat the entire interaction with CCU Doctor2 in this video, It's detailed in Part 4. CCU Doctor2 flawlessly executed the first part of the evil plan, just as his corrupt colleagues did earlier in the family meeting. CCU Doctor2 refused to reveal what happened in the operating room. I called the ambulance because Mama had rectal bleeding. I asked if Mama had any blood loss since leaving the emergency department. The answer was no. I asked if Mama had a heart attack, and the answer was no. I'm an engineer, not a doctor. I didn't have enough medical knowledge to know what additional probing questions I should ask. I still couldn't figure it out, so I demanded that Mama be transferred to Massachusetts General Hospital. My thought process was to transfer Mama to MGH and let MGH interrogate Emerson Hospital about what happened in the operating room, and then MGH would tell me. CCU Doctor2 went to the nurses and doctors station and called MGH. I stood outside Mama's room and alternately watched him to my right and Mama to my left. I don't know if he was really talking to MGH on the phone or with CEO Christine Schuster or one of his co-conspirator doctors pretending to speak with MGH. He returned and said MGH was at capacity and that they could not take Mama. I explained in Part 4 that I used an interrogation technique that Mama used on me and my siblings and outsmarted CCU Doctor2. CCU Doctor2 lost his temper, unwittingly slipped up, and told me that Mama's systolic blood pressure precipitously dropped to 60 in the operating room. That was the clue I needed to start putting the puzzle together, and that's why Emerson Hospital tightly guarded what happened in the operating room. This was at least the fourth time Mama's systolic blood pressure precipitously dropped by 50+ points, and the second time Mama's systolic blood pressure dropped to 60. Mama was pumped with 4 pressors, one after the other, to raise her systolic blood pressure. Even after CCU Doctor2 slipped up and partially blurted out what happened in the operating room, he was still committed to the cover-up. I immediately knew Mama had a stroke. This was precisely what I feared would happen. I argued with the arrogant admitting CCU doctor in the emergency department to avoid this. Now I could start to put the puzzle pieces together. Mama finally settled down. Now I knew what Mama wanted me to know. Mama's systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong in the operating room and the CCU, just as it had been in the emergency department on at least 3 occasions. When the transport team brought Mama to the CCU, they told CCU Doctor2 that Mama's systolic blood pressure reading was 60. Emerson Hospital knew that reading was wrong, and they did nothing to aid Mama. Remember the adage in medicine? If it's not written down, it didn't happen. Emerson Hospital didn't want to incriminate themselves in Mama's death, so they looked the other way and deliberately withheld care for Mama. These highly trained doctors were willing to let Mama die to save their evil secret. Even then, after slipping up and unwittingly revealing part of the secret, CCU Doctor2 was still committed to the cover-up. The systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong. So the obvious question is, what is Mama's correct systolic blood pressure reading? CCU Doctor2 abruptly stopped talking when he realized he blurted out part of the secret. He stared at me, trying to figure out if I understood the significance of his words. I did, but I didn't let on. I recounted our standoff in Part 4. We stood in the middle of the CCU floor staring at each other. The first person to speak loses. I wasn't backing down. After about 5 seconds, I started counting in my head. 1001, 1002, 1003. After more than 30 seconds of staring at each other, CCU Doctor2 asked me for permission to get Mama's correct systolic blood pressure from her femoral artery. I consented. Finally, after 9 hours and 1 minute, on August 7th, 2021, at 3:51 a.m., CCU Doctor2 took Mama's systolic blood pressure reading from her femoral artery only because I forced him to. Even then, after slipping up and unwittingly revealing part of the secret, CCU Doctor2 continued to support the cover-up by refusing to tell me Mama's correct systolic blood pressure reading when he finally measured it from Mama's femoral artery. CCU Doctor2's cryptic response was, well above 200. I asked again, and the response was the same, well above 200. I was surrounded by corrupt doctors. My options were limited. I felt Emerson Hospital had already started falsifying Mama's medical records to fit their narrative. I mentioned that the cover-up had two evil parts. The second part of the plan was sickeningly evil and depraved. The second part of the evil plan was to withhold medical care to Mama to protect Emerson Hospital's secret. The plan was not to render medical care to Mama if it would incriminate the doctors in Emerson Hospital and Mama's death. Mama arrived at the CCU on August 6, 2021 at 7:40 p.m. I believe Mama sustained some permanent injuries in the operating room, but I think Mama was still alive when she arrived at the CCU. If the CCU doctors helped Mama instead of actively killing Mama and participating in the cover-up, Mama would be alive today. Remember the adage in medicine, if it's not written down, it didn't happen? CCU Doctor2 intentionally withheld medical care so there wouldn't be anything incriminating in Mama's medical records. If I could figure out that Mama had a stroke, Emerson Hospital surely knew. And they knew this on August 6, 2021 at 6:50 p.m., if not before. A tissue plasminogen activator, or TPA, is the primary medication given to stroke victims to break up a blood clot and restore blood flow to the brain. The timeline is critical for these medications. They must be administered within 4.5 hours of the onset of stroke symptoms. Emerson Hospital would not allow me to see Mama until 7 hours and 31 minutes after Emerson Hospital knew Mama's stroke likely started. It took me an hour to piece together Emerson Hospital's evil plan, so by now over 8 hours and 30 minutes had elapsed since Mama arrived on the CCU floor. By the time I forced CCU Doctor2 to take Mama's systolic blood pressure from her femoral artery, 9 hours and 1 minute had elapsed since Mama arrived on the CCU floor. Mama was well outside the window for a TPA. Every piece of literature that exists implores stroke victims to get to a hospital as quickly as possible at the onset of a stroke. But Mama was at the hospital the entire time. Not only was Mama at the hospital, Mama was on the CCU floor. These highly trained doctors refused to treat Mama because it would expose their evil secret. Was Mama a candidate for a TPA? Or was Mama's systolic blood pressure too high and more drastic measures needed to be taken to reduce Mama's systolic blood pressure quickly? Emerson Hospital didn't know, and Emerson Hospital didn't want to know. Emerson Hospital's corrupt doctors didn't even try to save Mama's life. The cover-up was more important than Mama's life. Emerson Hospital acted with reckless disregard and depraved indifference to Mama's life. Despite Emerson Hospital's despicable actions, Dr. Robbie Goldstein, Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, appointed by Governor Maura Healey, and Kate Walsh, Secretary of Health and Human Services, refused to investigate Mama's death at Emerson Hospital. Dr. Goldstein, Kate Walsh, and Governor Healey, I will not allow you to ignore Mama's death and the subsequent cover-up. I wouldn't discover Emerson Hospital's evil secret until over a year after Mama's death, after 4 requests for Mama's medical records due to missing records, and hundreds of hours reading Mama's medical records at great harm to my mental health. I now know the secret, CEO Christine Schuster, the Emerson Hospital senior leadership team, including the 2 doctors on the leadership team, Dr. Barrett Kitch, board certified in critical care medicine, and Dr. Craig L. Best, Christy Barney, Vice President of Quality and Patient Safety, the panic gastroenterologist, the CCU doctors, and the CCU nurse knew, but hid from me. Everyone knew the evil secret except me. 9 hours and 1 minute after Mama arrived at the CCU, Emerson Hospital finally measured Mama's systolic blood pressure from her femoral artery. Emerson Hospital raised Mama's systolic blood pressure to 272. That is simply unimaginable. I estimate Emerson Hospital raised Mama's systolic blood pressure to at least 300 in the operating room, when Mama was pumped with 4 pressors, one after the other, when Mama's systolic blood pressure reading was normal and the cuff reading was wrong. For 9 hours and 1 minute, Emerson Hospital didn't know if a TPA would save Mama's life, or if Mama's systolic blood pressure needed to be reduced by other drastic measures. Emerson Hospital didn't even try to save Mama's life. For 9 hours and 1 minute, Emerson Hospital colluded and conspired to cover up Mama's death by every means possible when they knew Mama's systolic blood pressure reading from the cuff was wrong the entire time. For 9 hours and 1 minute, Mama's life didn't matter to Emerson Hospital. The only thing that mattered to Emerson Hospital was the cover-up. For 9 hours and 1 minute, since Mama's arrival at the CCU, CCU Doctor2 and his co-conspirator thug doctors knew something even more sinister was happening to Mama. They knew Mama was still being pumped with 4 IV medications to raise her systolic blood pressure to even higher, unimaginable levels when it was already astronomically elevated. The cover-up was more important than Mama's life and disconnecting the 4 IV medications that were killing Mama. For 9 hours and 1 minute, until I forced Emerson Hospital to act, these were the sounds of Emerson Hospital intentionally, with forethought, killing Mama. That's my mama.